Let's get the show on the road. Hello, I'm Kevin Selch, the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce past chair, still here, and founder of Little Brown Jug Brewing Company, where we make amazing beer that brings people together and builds hometown pride. On behalf of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, we acknowledge we are gathered today on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene Nations, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our clean drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation and Treaty 3 territory. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Indigenous leaders with us today, including Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels, as well as the federal, provincial, and municipal leaders joining us today. And of course, the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne. This conversation comes at an important time. The global economy has shifted. Canada's competitiveness is evolving. The new federal budget introduces big investments that will shape how our province and our nation position themselves in the year ahead. We have a room full of business and community leaders, and if there's one golden thread that connects us all, it's that we share the economic pressures of this moment. And we're all looking for clarity on what comes next. So what are the opportunities? How do we stay competitive? What actions can we take today to ensure long-term sustainable growth? In just a moment, we'll welcome Canada's Minister of Finance and National Revenue to explore the answers. But first, as a registered nonprofit, everything we do at the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce is made possible by the support of our members and sponsors. Today's event is made possible by our presenting sponsor, CPA Manitoba, and our title sponsor, CPMG LLC. Thank you for your commitment to our chamber community and today's conversation. Everyone, please join me in a round of applause for today's sponsors. Now, to welcome Minister Champagne, it's my pleasure to introduce our next guest, the Honorable Rebecca Chartrand, an Anishinaabe, Innu, and Métis leader who was elected as the Member of Parliament for Churchill Kiwaskinunaski on April 28, 2025. On May 13, 2025, she was appointed Minister of Northern and Arctic Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, becoming the first Indigenous woman to hold this portfolio and the first First Nations woman from Manitoba to be appointed to Cabinet. For 25 years, her career was in education. There's more to say. And Vice President of Inspire, so a nationally recognized advocate for Indigenous inclusion and cultural revitalization. She has served on the boards of the Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba, the Canadian Museum of Nature, and the Indigenous Education Advisory Council. So please.
Generous introduction. So good morning everybody. Bonjour, Tanzania, Guatemala, Pine Creek, Duck Bay, Bogart, and Fiji. So it's such a privilege to be standing here in front of you as the first First Nations woman to represent as a minister in this province. So thank you for acknowledging that. And I'm not saying that, and because we want to make sure that, that I'm not the last. And this is a true signal of the work that we've been doing around reconciliation. So thank all of you who supported me in that. I just want to tell you a little bit about CKA, Churchill Kiwanukaski. It represents 75% of Manitoba's landmass. It's 73 communities. It's 42 First Nations, it's 20 remote isolated communities. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of connecting the North to the rest of Manitoba. In terms of my ministry, it represents 40% of Canada's landmass. It's everything above the prairie provinces, including northern Quebec and northern Labrador. So lots of traveling, and I keep telling myself I love flying. So from Manitoba to the tips of the Arctic, my role is to connect the voices, our local voices, with national priorities. I'm fortunate to sit at the cabinet tables making sure Manitoba's voice is heard. And well, we have Churchill. It's on the major projects list. And I want to say with that, there are other people that need to be recognized in that. The late Jim Carr, for example, Ben Carr, MP Terry Duguid, they have had a hand in making sure that Churchill kept alive over the years. So I just want to acknowledge their work in that as well. I also want to acknowledge MP Levac, who's also here with us. Thank you for being here. So when we think about Churchill, it's not just a northern port, it's a gateway to global trade, and Manitoba deserves a seat at the table. Churchill Plus is where things matter. In Canada's growth story, we know that Churchill is at the heart of that story. So all of you here today, we all have a hand to play in getting it across the line. So now I want to introduce François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Finance and National Revenue. Since elected in 2015, he's held deep cabinet experience positions, including Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Foreign Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities, and International Trade. Before politics, he was a successful businessman, leading in international law and business. He's attracted billions in foreign investments into Canada's economy. This experience and his international business acumen, as well as his charismatic leadership, make him one of a kind, right for the job. So I'm so privileged to sit just diagonally across from Minister Champagne, and I have to tell you, it is so much fun to watch him up there. He doesn't just balance the books, he balances the mood in the room. When he stands up, you know, there's a line he often says that gets a whole rise from the entire house. And he says, "We will take no lessons. We will take no lessons from the opposition, Mr. Speaker." And I look at him with marvel and I go, wow, there's just so much charisma, and then the whole room lights up. So one of these days I am going to borrow your line in the house. So without further ado, I just want to acknowledge somebody that I look up to that's very inspirational, somebody that, you know, is a friend to so many, and he is the right person for the job, and it's such a privilege to introduce you here today, my friend. The Minister.
Thank you very much. Wow. So much energy in the room. This is like, some people say I have a bit of energy, but I can tell you Winnipeg, Manitoba, wow, this is like, it's only, what, 9:48 and we're lighting the room already. That's pretty good, Laurie. Done a good job.
Well, I think you have a lot to do with it. And again, on behalf of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, our members, our city, those gathered here today, thank you very much for coming to Winnipeg. And I know last time I was in Ottawa when we were meeting, we talked about you wanted to come to Winnipeg, we wanted to explore these opportunities, and I really do appreciate you coming. I do have to share the story, of course. So this came together very quickly, and it was Monday, and you may recall what happened on Monday. There was this little budget vote, and
I do.
I was talking to one of your colleagues, and I'm like, well, when's the budget vote? And he said, oh, in about 20 minutes. And then literally at 5:27, 3 minutes before the budget vote, I get a FaceTime call, and it's the finance minister, and I'm like, and he's telling me how excited he's about coming to Winnipeg, and I'm like, don't you have the budget vote in 3 minutes? So that gives you an idea just how excited he is and how honored we are for you to be here on the stage with us. And I think you can see there's standing room only.
Wow.
This is the result of the success of us hosting the Grey Cup, and I want to just really acknowledge the Bombers doing a great job hosting, because getting a venue the week after Grey Cup, it's impossible. So really, thanks to the Inn at the Forks, great job. But we got a lot to talk about. So let's get right into it.
Can I just say thank you first?
Sure.
No, I mean, I know you're supposed to do the interview, but let me just say thank you. First of all, I want to acknowledge a few people. My dear friend Ben Carr, I just want to say thank you, Ben, for really, no, I mean, people should give a big round of applause for Ben, Terry Duguid, Jeanette. Obviously, Rebecca. I hope I'm not missing anyone. Jeanette is there as well. Jeanette is there because I can tell you the voice of Manitoba resonates in the budget. And I can tell you when Manitoba speaks, Ottawa will listen. And I said that to Premier Canoe. We were just having breakfast this morning, and I can tell you, I want to say thank you. And it's true that I was on a treadmill when I said to Ben, I'd like to come to Winnipeg. He said, when? I said, well, in 2 days. And he said, okay, we'll try to make that happen. But I know people in Manitoba and Winnipeg answer well to the call. It's not the first time. And I want to say also, thank you, Chief Daniels, for taking the time to be with us this morning. It's always a privilege to be with you and to be in the great province. And to you, Lorraine, I think you earned or you won the CEO of the Year. So that's not a small accomplishment. A big round of applause for someone who's... we had the chance to do many things. And I see Korish in the room. I have to say that we did, in a very sad thing, PS 752 together. So thank you for your leadership. But it's great to be in town. I can tell you there's a buzz in Manitoba. There's a buzz in the prairie. I would say there's even a buzz in the country about where we're going despite the headwind, and we can dive into that. But I just want to say thank you to everyone. I don't know, some of you may have seen champagne on the menu today, because I'm very impressed that there be so many people so early on a Friday morning. So for all of those who saw that, thank you for showing up. We're going to try with Lorraine to give you the best of the best, but it is a real privilege to be in Manitoba. And every time I've come here, always impressed by the energy, but also the leadership and the depth and breadth of what we can do in this province. And I was sharing that with the Premier, how excited I was. And trust me, I have a long list that we're going to put together, but we're happy to dive into that. But thank you to everyone. Merci tout le monde, évidemment, d'être ici. Je sais qu'il y a plusieurs francophones. On a des jeunes étudiants de l'université qui sont avec nous. Alors, on peut faire en anglais ou en français. Ça me fait grand plaisir, mais c'est un privilège d'être avec vous ce matin. So, back to you, Lauren. And you're supposed to ask the questions, right?
Oui.
All right.
Je pense, man.
Okay, good.
Yeah, let's begin with talk on Budget 2025. Historic on many levels. Generational investments define not just the financial direction of the government, but really sets Canada on a brave new path. One area of note, though, is the federal deficit, now standing an all-time high. Some have mused that government should seek new tax revenues to help address this. Let me be clear, the Winnipeg Chamber is not one of those. Our provincial government, in Tuesday's throne speech, committed to not only balancing the books as promised, but doing so without raising any taxes in the upcoming budget. So my question to you, let's start easy. Do you commit today to a deficit reduction plan that does not include any new or increased taxes on Canadian people and business?
So they told me this was a friendly crowd, right?
It is a very friendly
That was in my notes as I flew in yesterday, and I'm sure the camera is rolling like crazy now. I can tell you something, but let me say first. First of all, I want to commend the Chamber for the work you've done. I looked yesterday at the budget submission, and you rank us what we've achieved, what we can do better. But let's take a step back and say, first of all, if you look at the deficit this year, about 75% of it is really for two things. One is affordability. And I can tell you, Lorraine, when I travel across the country, a lot of folks are worried about the end of the week and the end of the month. I mean, a lot of people see that as the main priority. So affordability was about 40% of what you saw in the deficit. People say, yeah, but give us a break now. We understand the vision, but affordability remains core to what we see in Canada. Is the same thing in the G7, south of the border. That's the first thing. The second thing was sovereignty. I think everyone would agree as Canadians that faced with tariff, we had to respond. And we had to protect workers, we had to protect industry, we had to pivot. And that leads me to give you a bit of background. I mean, Canada has the privilege to chair the G7. So I always say you can look at the world in absolute terms and relative terms to see where do we stand, what we should do, how we're going. But there's no doubt that when you sit at the G7, and our last meeting was in Washington, there's a bit of headwind. And Canada is no different. I mean, if you look at the speed, scope, and scale of change in the world, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's tariff, whether it's the economy, whether it's even technology, the connection between AI and quantum and cyber. I mean, it's coming at a speed, and I'm looking at the room, that few of us will experience in our lifetime. Some go back to 1945, others will go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, but I would say we're living in a time that is very special, and to give you a sense of perspective, the International Monetary Fund put what they call the uncertainty index. Today, the uncertainty index is much higher than it was during the financial crisis. So that just gives people a sense of perspective, the world we live in. And I even said that to my colleagues at the G7. I said, we cannot let uncertainty become the new certainty. You know, this is a world where if you're a farmer on the field, if you have a family business, on the shop floor, everyone feels it. We all feel the headwind. Oh, Canada is no different. So you start with that, and we say, the world is different. You know, nostalgia is never a good strategy. The world's never going to be the same. We're entering into a new set of rules, to the extent that you want to call that rules, but certainly a world that's going to change significantly. Then you look at, okay, in light of that, what can you do? So you can look down and hope for the best and say, let's try to do like we did before, and maybe we'll get a better outcome. Or you can use your fiscal capacity to say, it's a time to invest. It's a time to protect. And in that, I want again to quote, because I think it's relevant, when the International Monetary Fund in Washington said there's only 2 countries, not 10, not 20, not 50, 2 countries in the world which can really afford that. It's Germany and Canada. There's only 2 countries in the world can do that. Because of our AAA credit rating, because we have the lowest debt to GDP, we have one of the lowest deficit to GDP, just after Japan. So we have like the firepower to be able to feel, you know, to position ourselves to change course, but in a way that matters. And then you say, but if you're using your firepower, you need to be smart. So you need to invest in capital. That's why we presented a capital budget, expenses. You go to the grocery, you spend, you buy a house, you invest. So we said the places where you can build a nation for the future is infrastructure. The place where you can build a nation is housing, which is key to affordability. Place where we need to tackle is productivity and innovation. And I was just with the Premier, and he was saying your productivity super deduction is so in line with what we want to do in Manitoba. Because I'm 55 and we've been talking about productivity since I can read. And this is not like yesterday. So we've been asking ourselves, what should we do? And then protecting our sovereignty. And at the and I'll finish there. And the other thing I would say, Canadians have said, okay, we get that. There's the immediate concerns of family and workers and farmers. There's the vision, but you need to put the house in order. Canadians have been tightening their belt for quite some time, I would say since COVID and even before, and they expect the same thing from Ottawa. And that's where we launched one thing, which was the expenditure review and finding 60 billion of savings. And for me, that gives credibility. That gives seriousness to the process. That gives people have a sense of confidence that if you're going to ask us to chart a way forward together, you need to tighten your belt. And that's the work we've been able to do. So one eye on the future, obviously, but at the same time, putting the house in order. And I think what is, to go back specifically to your question, the fundamental shift that we've taken in this country is to say that in 3 years from now, we're going to balance our operating budget with our revenues. So to the extent that we need to borrow 3 years from now, this is going to be for capital investment. The type of thing that's going to make our country more resilient. The type of thing that's going to be a gift to the next generations. Because we used to do great things in this country, and we need to start building again. You know, the kind of infrastructure, like you're in Manitoba, you've been blessed by geography. You've been blessed by many things, but geography is one. At the center of logistics of North America. So free-flowing infrastructure, investing in housing, investing in the infrastructure that is going to make sure, talk about the Port of Churchill that Rebecca, think about, you know, I'm reminded the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is on the East Coast, someone said it probably cost about $4 billion back then, but it enabled $1 trillion of trade today. So this is how we need to think, you know, where do you want the country to be in an exponential way in a very uncertain world? And my message to Canadians is, oh, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. You know why? Because when I look at Canada and I'm thinking about here in Winnipeg, we're a magnet for talent. I mean, the world wants to come here. Let's be honest. This is a place, and we put $1.7 billion in the budget to attract the best and brightest. I want the best mind in the world to come in our research center, in our universities, in our lab, in our businesses, because, you know, this is how we're going to power the future together. We have very large industry. You sit here in Winnipeg, the aerospace industry, the ag industry. We are at the, you know, we're one of the few nations in the world we know who knows how to build planes, to build cars, to build ships. I mean, very few nations, if you look even in the G7, have these very strong industry. Thirdly, we have critical minerals. And again, I was with the Premier thinking about that, and many would say critical minerals are akin to oil in the 20th century. Those who control critical minerals, not only the exploration, extraction, but the refining, are going to be key in terms of national security and economic security for years to come. Then you look at energy, and you're in Manitoba. Even the Premier was saying we have excess green energy. The green molecule is probably the most precious thing you can find in the world today, in a world that wants to decarbonize. And in Manitoba, we're leading the way, and we're looking at adding capacity. And I'll finish to say we're the only G7 country to have a free trade agreement with all the other G7 nations. So when you sit down at the table, I can assure you there's a lot of G7 colleagues who would like to take my seat. And I tell them, no, thank you. Because if you look at the world today and you look at the comparative advantage of Canada, there's a lot to feel confident. But this is not a time to rest. This is a time to plan. This is a time to execute. This is a time to focus. And I hope that's kind of the budget will bring that supercharging growth that we need to see in the country.
Thank you.
It's passion, you know, it's passion. You can remove that.
Yeah. I will say, based on your comments around, you know, we need to focus on affordability for Canadians, tighten the belt, get the house in order, that's the focus as opposed to, I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm going to say, my sense is that you're not looking at increasing taxes. Just want that on the record. And you mentioned Port of Churchill. I want to say, just always a nice reminder, you said we're blessed by geography. We're also a maritime province sometimes. I like to remind people of that, right? You know, we do have this coastline and wonderful access to trade routes. So speaking of major projects, and the Major Project Office signals your government's commitment to accelerating the development of critical infrastructure, Canada needs to thrive. While not officially referred during the Prime Minister's visit here for the Grey Cup last weekend, he reaffirmed collaborative efforts on Port of Churchill Plus. The North End Water Pollution Control Centre is another essential project for Manitoba's future growth. So where I'm going with this is in 2018, the Canadian Global Cities Council, which our chamber is a member of, it's the 8th largest chambers in the country, released a paper calling for a national urban agenda that would see the federal government take a more active role in supporting cities directly. Minister, can you speak to how the federal government views the role of cities today and how your government aims to support critical infrastructure and address the financial constraints faced by cities themselves?
Yeah, I mean, you know, municipalities have been great partners all along, and I love that. I come from rural Canada, so for those of you who don't, I come from Shawinigan. You remember the other guy? They call him the little guy. He's 6'4". I just wish they had another name for this guy. But you know, my riding is bigger than Belgium, so I get the rural aspect. I get, you know, the reality of the ground. I get, you know, when you're in a rural riding, you're like a mayor. Everyone stops you at the grocery store, at the gas station, and so the connectivity. I don't need poles. When they ask me, what have you seen? I don't need polls. I just have to go to the grocery store. Trust me, and I get all the feedback that one would need to form an opinion as to what's going on in the country, talking to people. And I would say municipalities have been key partners in that, and that's why we recognized it. And it's interesting. I thought you would ask me, why do you say generational? And I want to give you a sense of perspective, because it's only when you compare that you can assess, are you doing something which is really generational? And I know some pundits have been asking, you know, what do you find? If you look in the G7 again today, the largest investment in infrastructure in the world, the North Star would be Germany, to give you a sense. Germany is being seen as really the country who has done the most on that. Their plan is 500 billion euro over 12 years. Now, if I translate that in Canadian dollar, that would be about $800 billion. If you look at the Canadian plan, we're $450 billion over 5 years. And I'm not even adjusting for the size of the economy. So you see that in the G7 now, we have the most ambitious infrastructure plan in the G7. So that gives a sense of perspective why the world looks at Canada. And I can tell colleagues, I said, wow, you really changed course. You really want to do that. And then you're coming to municipalities as a key partner, because if we want to build more housing, we need to be on the infrastructure side with municipalities. Talk about sewers, think about pipes, think about replacement, because everything is connected in a sense. The infrastructure you need at the municipal level will enable more housing. more housing leads to more affordability. There's kind of a continuum of things you need to do in that. And that's why we put 51 billion, which is quite significant. And we also answered the call of a number of provincial colleagues, say, help us with the health infrastructure. This is a first in the country where we say, we're going to do something and we're going to do something special because our hospitals, our clinic, we need you to shoulder some of the burden to do that together. And I think this is also a change of approach to say, we're listening very carefully. We're working with mayors and reeves. I was just in Regina yesterday, same kind of feedback, with the Saskatchewan municipalities. Say, we like the federal government as a key partner, and so that's why we decided to boost that and have. I'm happy to say that when you compare us to the world, we're probably going to be leading the pack. And if you add that, and I'm looking at Rebecca, think about the infrastructure, the Arctic Infrastructure Fund. I mean, for the first time in our nation history, in chief, that we're going to build the North like never before. I mean, this is a moment that this is a budget that speaks to the North. Yeah, I think we should be proud. This is a budget that speaks to the North, that speaks to Indigenous people. And think about also in the defense side, Yes, we need to shoulder our fair share. You're looking on a cash basis about 81 billion, but this needs to be used in a very smart way. Dual use asset, runway, ports, airports. If we're going to have forward advanced base, I want to give a kudo to Rebecca, because also when we look at that, maybe people have talked less about that, Chief, but you can say one of the things I'm most proud is when I looked at how we deliver health services in the North and start a discussion with the First Nations, with Métis and Indigenous and Inuit leader to say how we can do better, and involving our armed forces into that as well. You may have seen in the budget, I made sure that if we're going to open forward operating base, what can we do better? There's a human cost to fly in and out of people who need medical services, and I think we can do better. And starting that discussion is a great, it's a great start. And Rebecca was with me to say we need to do more, because I really think this is a budget that's, for me, the spirit of Manitoba is vibrating towards this budget. You look at what Manitoba needs to succeed and grow and reach its full potential, and I personally believe, the voice of colleagues was very strong. I see Terry Duguid with the Water Agency, my good friend Terry, and I think everyone should know in this province that Terry has been the father of the Water Agency, and trust me, every time I walk in the house, he said, "You're going to protect my water agency, right?" and I said, "Yes, Terry." And I must say that we did that, but these are the kind of pillars and foundational things that we need in our country. But building the North, for me, in a better way, doing dual use infrastructure, making sure that our investment in defense will serve communities as well, I think is a game changer. And that's why when you say infrastructure, it's not only in municipalities and in small communities. And I'm always reminded, because I come from a small place, that you put 20,000 in a community for an ice rink, a kitchen community center, or a small local thing makes a huge difference. Yes, we're going to do the big things. We're going to do the ports. We're going to do the mines. But let's make sure it relates to people in their daily lives. And I think that's the balance that we struck. And it go back to your point where we started between affordability and vision. This is an investment budget. And this is how we framed it. And I went back to almost 1867 when there were budget. You had budget, pre-war, post-war, recovery. And this was, for me, very much an investment budget where you want to crowd in investment in the country. Because if we want to have a higher standard of living for Canadians and leave a better place to our children, we need to get serious on investments. We need to get serious on productivity. We need to get serious on competition, because that's going to be our leg, I would say, to the next generation. And I think others have done it before, and we're going to be in a position to do it again.
Merci. I want to follow up on that serious on productivity, because my next two questions are on productivity, and then I want to talk about tariffs and a little bit on defense spending. But in this budget, your government introduced the productivity super deduction, significantly reducing Canada's marginal effective tax rate for several industries to boost productivity and attract investment. And you're right, we've been talking about productivity for a while. I'm 54, so I've also been there with you talking about it. Are there plans, speaking of productivity though, are there plans for a tax review commission, something that our chamber and others have been calling for a long time, given the last time we looked systemically at our tax system was, I believe, your predecessor, McEachran, many years ago.
I was fairly young.
Yeah, 1960s.
You too.
Yep. So that was the last time we did a major look at our tax review, our entire system. Is there plans, or can you speak to how the government would go about approaching a broader review based on the principles of fairness, transparency, simplicity, competitiveness, and sustainability of all our tax levers, such as personal and corporate income tax, if we're truly going to drive productivity and seize the opportunity that the super deduction provides?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that, and thank you, because the first thing the Premier talked to me this morning about was the productivity super deduction. You know, he said, I hope you're going to raise that, because, you know, today, by the way, for all of those who are listening and those at home and those who may report, Canada is the most competitive tax jurisdiction for new investment in the G7. Our marginal effective tax rate is lower than the United States by a margin. So we did that because we look at the one big beautiful bill, and I always say we don't live in an island. So when people compare where dollars should go, they would compare to one jurisdiction to the other. But today, for all the business people in the room, $1 investing in Canada has a better tax treatment for new investment than any other jurisdiction in the G7, which is quite significant, because I think there's a perception about Canada that we all need to work together to bring back to the world. And I would enlist everyone in this room as ambassadors, because I always say there's very few people who wake up in the morning thinking about Canada. I do, you do, but we need to bring that message to the world and say Canada has a new roadmap. Canada is the most effective place. And in fact, I quote again the International Monetary Fund, but they see Canada as the second largest country in terms of growth for the next 2 years. So they see the growth in the world, obviously in the G7, in our case, they say, who's the country we're going to have the most growth in the next 2 years? And believe it or not, after the United States, it's Canada. So there's a lot that the world see in ourselves. The world wants what Canada needs. The world wants what Canada has, and I would say increasingly needs. You know, you look at stability, predictability, the rule of law. I would dare to say it's in high demand and short supply these days. So when you look at the confluence, and I'm thinking about Manitoba because I look at the confluence, I think Canadians starts to realize the nexus between energy security, economic security, I will add food security and national security. And if you look at the world with these lenses, you start looking at Canada in a very different way. You start looking at Canada as this reliable, stable, predictable partner. If you're in Asia Pacific, where we're looking, because you know that demography is destiny, you look at that and you say, who could be my supplier of choice when it comes to energy or food security? Obviously, if you're in Japan or South Korea, you think about Canada immediately. You're looking at, you know, critical minerals for Europe and our NATO ally. Who could be the supplier of choice for the next 10, 20, 30 years? Canada comes to mind immediately. We're just hosting the King of Sweden and the Queen of Sweden, and you should see the appetite for Canada to be this transatlantic voice that the world needs in order to secure a number of things, because we've been blessed, like I said, with many things. So to answer your question, I see Canada in a very positive way and in a way that we can succeed. And the fact that we have crowding investment with the productivity super deduction, imagine today, if you're a small business watching or listening at home, you can immediately expense new buildings, equipment, technology, AI, R&D, patents. I mean, the type of thing that's going to grow the economy. And this is quite phenomenal because, you know, what we have heard, people have been saying to us, give us a break so that we can invest in the country. But by doing that, you're basically offering cash flow on the first year for businesses who are profitable. So this is a huge step. In addition to two things we need to do together, and I hate to give you homework, Laurie, because you already won the award of the best CEO, so I can pile on that. You know, building one Canadian economy. I think we would all agree it's all about time. I mean, it's about time when you manufacture a product in Manitoba that you can sell across the nation, and same thing around. I mean, you know, if the world has taught us something, we need to move from reliance to resilience. And the first point of resilience is, why don't we make sure that our economy works among our provinces, that we can free flow the goods, that we have, you know, these trade corridors that work. And the second thing I would say, being our own best customer. I mean, isn't that about time that we buy Canadian? I remember when I started, and it's been a frustration of mine for years, the mantra in Ottawa was open by default. And I look and say, why not Canadian by default, by the way? I mean, the world has changed in a way that we've never seen. You don't need to be the Boy Scout in the room. You know, we're gonna respect what we need in terms of our trade agreements, but at the same time, we're gonna favor that startup in Canada. We're gonna favor our steel from Canada. We're gonna favor our lumber from Canada. We're gonna favor what we make here in this country to build this country. You know, when I went to have my shoes, I purposely went to a place to make them with them because I say made in Canada by Canadians for Canadians. And that's the spirit we need. And I said that to the Premier, not only at the federal level, but we need provincial leaders, municipal leaders, and corporate Canada. Because the biggest power we have is the purchasing power. If all of us decide to put Canada first, imagine what that's going to do for small and medium-sized businesses, startup in the country. And I've been enlisting corporate Canada to join us in that, because yes, we can give the tax incentives for people to invest, but what I hear the most, and Ben would be with me, we've done a number of things together with Ben, people say, Minister, we don't need a grant, we don't even need a loan, we need you to be our customer, because if you buy our product, we're going to be able to go around the world, and with the vision we have to double our overseas export from 300 billion to 600 billion, to say to other nation, our government believes in ourselves. We have a product that is strong. We have a product that is meeting all the requirements. And I think this is a mindset that we need to have in Canada to, you know, sometimes I feel I'm the bragger in chief for Canada. We need to start bragging. It's not part of our DNA, but there's a lot to be proud of in this country, and brag a bit about what we do, how we do best. We have the best worker in the world. We have the resources. We have the energy. Compare the world sometime to other jurisdictions. And for you, I would say, if all the Chamber of Commerce were to ask all their members and really have like a national discussion about how can we buy more Canadian together, I think this would do a great service to the nation.
Well said. Well said. I want to say, I do want to note though that when we do talk about a tax reform commission, that it's not just competitiveness, and that's why I want to really stress that for us it is about simplicity, the compliance costs. We have CPAs here, I believe CPA, Manitoba, KPMG, so we do definitely see that there's an opportunity from the simplicity side to make it easier to be able to...
And I'm with you 100% to go that, because you're in front of me and you're smiling. I have to answer the question specifically. I can say I have started to remove boutique tax credit. And I've done that. You may have seen some taxes where people ask me, why would you remove that? There was this something called luxury tax. I said, it's very simple. It was the second question I got with 150 journalists. And he said, why would that be simple? I said, I'm pragmatic. It costs me more to collect the tax than the money I get. Very simple decision for me. So we need to get to more, streamlined tax code, better processes. You've seen the start of that. But I'm not in the boutique. I'm not in the retail tax credit. I'm not in that. I want to make sure that if we want to streamline and cut red tape and compliance costs, and I'll give you SHRED. Can I take a second? SHRED. So SHRED is this tax credit that 60% of our businesses in the country, it's the darling of tax credit. Am I right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I mean, she's saying it, and she's the sponsor of the event as well. So this is the darling of all tax credits. So if you want to do R&D, Canada is recognized in the OECD as the top, best in class when it comes to that. What we heard from business people, they were saying, yeah, this is good, but you know what? The administration of that tax credit is so heavy that it's almost a disincentive. So you know what I did? I went to a company which has a couple of billion in market cap and streamlining process called Shopify. And I said, if these guys can simplify process and have billions in market cap, they might know one or two things that we can learn from them about simplifying process to enable business. So I went to them, and within 24 hours, they came back and they gave us like a blueprint, which we start looking, and we said, we're going to revamp that. You know, people were asking me, we don't need more money in the program. We just need the program to work and to provide us predictability. So what we did now, and for all the accountants and consultants and lawyers in the room, now we benchmark also what they do best in the Nordic country. And what you do now is a pre-approval. So now imagine you apply online, you get a pre-approval of your project within a very short time, and then you have the predictability that you're going to get the refund. That I was told by an organization called Build Canada as a game changer and being applauded by pretty much all small businesses, because imagine before they would take 2 or 3 years of audit after you've spent the money. Now they get a pre-approval online that tells them if you do what you said you're going to do, this is the credit you're going to get, and this is how we streamline processes. I use that as an example because we need you more than ever. Because, you know, we need to bring the private sector, we need to bring the best and brightest in the room to help us improve these things. Because this is work in progress. We've done it with Shred, and I'm looking, you know, as we've been looking at how we can find savings at the government, how you streamline, how you right size, how you bring these things to life so that for businesses today, what I've heard at least, and I'd be happy to hear from you, but this is a game changer. So it's not always about adding money, but it's about doing better things, cutting red tape, provide predictability, which are going to help small and medium-sized businesses across the country.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad you were able to expand on that. And again, because for us, when we talk about tax competitiveness, tax reviews, it's those issues that you just raised about, it's not always about a race to the bottom. It's about how can we do things better? How can we administer the compliance cost? The complexity is a cost to business. It's not necessarily always about the percentage rate. But I still want to stay on productivity, because while productivity is of course driven by investment in technology and equipment, it's also driven by skills and abilities of the workforce. Many reports suggest that AI is not replacing people, it's just reshaping jobs, and in the coming years it will create roles we don't even have descriptions for yet. How does this budget prepare Canada's workforce, not only with the new tools, but with the capacity to use tomorrow's technologies for jobs that don't have a name yet?
No, it's very good. You know, I was with someone who had a fair success in AI called Jensen from NVIDIA. I mean, some would say that he's been fairly successful. And I was with him and trying to understand the power of AI. And one thing he left with me, he said, Minister, you need to think, you know, our brain is made to think in the linear fashion. We're not very good to think exponentially. You know, if you ask people to predict what the world's going to look like in 5 years from now, or 10 years, you know, there's people who could get there. But when you think about 30 years from now, it's really, really challenging. Just look at our mobile phone. I mean, those who are of my generation, I mean, you know, you would have said that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that you'd have more computing power in your phone than you had when we went to the moon. Or that your daughter could do FaceTime and that basically costs nothing, and she's on it for hours. You know, it's the kind of thing that you would have said that 30 years ago. Those who would remember long distance call, that you were charged by the minute, I think, for the calls, or I can remember, but I was young with calling family in Florida. It would be very quick, you know, you had to, and it's just, you know, but this is only 20 years. Now, I would say with the confluence of quantum, AI, cyber, and telecom technology, we were just with the FBI and the Treasury in Washington recently trying to, you know, make sure that we would have all the components to protect the network. I mean, it's going to be exponential in a way that is very difficult to fathom, today in terms of what this is going to bring to us. So I think AI, the name of the game for us is adoption. And it's about responsible AI. Because I said if you want to foster innovation and adoption, you need trust. And that's why Canada has been at the forefront of what we call this responsible AI. Because if we go out in the street, you and I think, I don't know, but I would say it's probably 50-50. I see a lot of the young people. I mean, you would be probably better to assess how to adapt the technology. But folks in the street would say, you know, if you have a small business, there's a lot going on. Do you have time for that? I would say everyone should take the time for that, because AI is going to transform the way we operate business, and it's basically the silver lining in terms of productivity and innovation. But what we need to do together is adoption, and in small and medium-sized businesses. And I'll give you a very practical example. I always refer to Kelowna and Hamilton as two cities. To give you an example where these applications are not necessarily something we'd have thought, they put all their building code in AI now. So you want a building permit, you just get online 24/7, and don't quote me on that, but like 98% of the work is done, and then you have a human interaction to make sure the machine got the right result. But if you think building codes, it's really to know, if you're going to put a fence, it has to be so many feet, it's such a height, but the AI can do all that, and they've become like a center of excellence for that. So you think about, imagine if you can apply that in so many ways in businesses, in government, at all level, how much productivity we can get. So for me, I think, and Canada, by the way, bragging, Canada was the first country in the world to have an AI national strategy, and Canada was the first country in the world to have a quantum national strategy. Now, you'd say me, great, but a lot of people have catch up, and there's huge amounts of money being poured there. But when you look at Canada, where we had a Nobel Prize, which, some would argue that AI was invented in Canada. You think about the Courier, you think about those who have won these prizes. I mean, we have been at the foundational level of AI. But what we need in Canada is a bit more speed and scale. Finding ways for our small, medium-sized startup to really capture that and help our businesses to become more productive, because it's in so many ways that those who are going to adopt AI, I think, are going to be succeeding. And it leads me to a different thing, but I have to say it in case you don't ask the question. I would think that every business in the country should have a defense strategy. Whether you're in services or product, I mean, you look at the amount of money that's going to be invested by the G7 countries, let alone NATO. I know the G7 because we meet often. It's a few trillion, 3, 4, 5 trillion US dollar over the next few years. This is something that we have never seen. Just to give you an example, like people would often quote 650 billion US, the reconstruction of Ukraine. Think about when you're talking about 4 to 5 trillion US dollar, how much money you're talking about. I mean, I think that there's enormous opportunity for businesses, because for us as a nation, we'll have to think in a very different way. We need to learn from the best, in a sense. If you're not a country that projects power, you need to use this tax dollar and investment to support our universities, our colleges, to become the best in AI, the best in quantum, the best in cybersecurity, the best in new material. And I think that's an opportunity for Canada, because these sums that are going to be quite important to protect our sovereignty. Yes, we need the hard assets. Yes, we need to build the ports and the airports and all that. But we also need to build human capital and human innovation at our universities. I mean, this is a moment where I've said that to colleges, to universities, and we're in Manitoba. There's great things going on in the country and in Manitoba and in Winnipeg in particular. But this is something that everyone should think, where would they fit within that? And I'll give you the example before, even in healthcare delivery in the North. My immediate, when I saw Rebecca, was to say, how can we do better? If we're going to do all that in the North, there must be something for the people. And how can we help them? So I just want to put, because I don't know if you were asking me that question, but anyway, I volunteered the answer.
Ahead of the tariff question.
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't know what's the rest, but I volunteer an answer.
I want to talk about tariffs now. Obviously, tariffs and evolving U.S. relations are reshaping Canada's industrial landscape, and I know there's a lot of attention. Often it gets Southern Ontario and the automotive industry. I do want to note, of course, we've got NFI Group here, a strong pillar of our community, specifically targeted with a fixed tariff 232 on bus manufacturing. So there's a lot of impact we're seeing here in Manitoba. That's just one example. But even if tariffs are settled and CUSMA as we know it is renewed, the Prime Minister has stated that our relationship with the U.S. has fundamentally changed. This means our national policy must adapt as well, and you've touched on many of those facets of which the government is. As Finance Minister, can you expand on the government's direct tariff response relief package and how prepared the government is to maintain or adapt that support should the current trade landscape evolve in a way that keeps these pressures more long-term?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question because, in fact, I mean, if you look, 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free because it's under the CUSMA exemption, which, you know, you could go back home and feel good because you say, well, you know, 85% and our effective tax rate is 5.4%, which is, in fact, the lowest in the world. So in a way, you can feel good. But if you're in affected industry, if you're in the auto sector, if you're in the steel sector, if you're in the aluminum sector, if you're in the forestry sector, if you're a canola farmer, a lentils farmer for tariffs that have been imposed by another country, but the reality is very different. If you're a worker in Oshawa and Hamilton, even in my own riding and in New Brunswick and many places, you feel that wind, you know, that would say the headwind, you know, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing this. That I go back to the uncertainty level, which, you know, uncertainty is the enemy of investment. You know, when people don't know what are the rules of the game, it's very difficult to invest. You know, business confidence, consumer confidence. And that's why I keep saying at the G7, we need to better organize ourselves because this is affecting all of us. And I would often say to our friends down south, I always say a decision on one side of the border would have an impact on both. Because when people invest, they look at these things, and now it's been global. Because you look at the growth rate in Canada is much lower, but the growth rate in the world is much lower as well, because this uncertainty is affecting the rest of the world. You could say Canada is better. You look at the bond market, 10 years, 30 years. Canada still borrow at a very competitive rate compared to many nations. So the world has trust in Canada. But if you're facing the tariff, what we need to do is to be true to our Canadian values. Our Canadian values is that if one part of the country is hurting, if one part of the country or workers in an industry are affected, we need to step up and say, you know what, we're going to help you pivot. We're going to help you to transform the industry, reskill your industry or the knowledge you have to be able to compete and to succeed in the economy. So that's why when I said you go back to your first question, if you look at the deficit, a good part of that was to respond to tariff and helping our workers. Like the $5 billion response fund that we put was really not by choice, but because we have to, you know, because you're not going to let full industries being affected. Think about a country. You need to have a steel industry if you're a G7 country. I mean, if you want to build a country, we need a steel industry. We need an aluminum industry. I would say we need a forestry industry. So we need these key pillars, and even an auto industry, not because it's in one part of the country, but if you think about the part manufacturers, it goes across. I can think of New Flyers. I can think of Boeing, which is in that province. I mean, their supply chain is across the board. So you have to look at the critical path before you form judgment. Sometimes people say, well, it's in Ontario. Well, hold on. Look at the critical path. Look at the minerals, where they're coming, where they're refined. Look at all the suppliers, and you might find that you're also part of that supply chain. In the EV sector, for example, the supply chain has extended across the country. So I think that's why the Prime Minister, charted the course, and it's been a wake-up call for the nation. I think as Canadians, because we've been blessed by geography, because of the Canadian dollar, because we live next to the largest market in the world, I think we have tended to really look south as the destination. I mean, the numbers speaks for themselves. And now we 9 months changed the world. And now we need to look, to mend for ourselves. One Canadian economy, our own best customers, diversification. Anyone who's in finance, what is true in finance is true for trade. Diversification is the name of the game. It's great that we have a customer, which is next door, which has been a steady supply of purchase. But I think in the world like we live today, we may want to diversify a bit. Obviously we're always going to trade with our neighbor because we're next door. But, there's markets like the Philippines, like Indonesia. The Prime Minister was just in the UAE, and I saw like 70 billion of investment they want to do in the country. You know what? In that kind of world, Canada becomes very attractive. I talk to a lot of sovereign fund, and they say, Minister, if it was your money, just look at the world. Where would you put your money? Canada is a huge mining jurisdiction. Canada is a huge manufacturing jurisdiction. Canada has 3 oceans. You know, we can go to the Arctic, we can go to the Pacific, we can go to the Atlantic. We have this web of trade agreements. We have preferential market access to 1.5 billion consumers. I reminded that to my Indian counterpart. I said, can you imagine Canada? You know, you're 1.2 billion, but for us, we have access to 1.5 billion consumer on a preferential basis. That is the key advantages, but that we need now to seize fully, to bring. So for me, yes, obviously responding to the tariff and supporting our industry to pivot, because this is not, if you're a canola farmer today, none of what's happening is your fault. The ground has shifted under your feet, but you're not responsible. Geopolitics has changed the market. But what you do then, we need to make sure we open new markets. We need to make sure that we look at others who look at food security, and I go back to many countries, food security is national security. And bring this kind of, the Canadian product, which has traceability, quality, excellence. Brand Canada is very powerful in the world. And so how do we reduce our reliance and become more resilient? And I think that is, if we look back 20 years from now, and you and I, well, I don't know if we're going to be on stage, but I hope we're going to be around. We can look back and say, I think this was a pivotal moment in our nation history. That's why I call that generational shift, where we need to look, and I look also with Chief Daniels is there, you know, Indigenous people have been part of the fabric of Canada, how we do things together, how we build together, how we learn from each other. I think it's a great moment for the country. In many ways, the headwind is affecting us, but it's also a time for us to charter our own course. You know, in French, they say maître chez nous, which is master in our own home. And I think that there's a good feeling about empowering Canadians and say, you know what, the world has been maybe easy on us for many decades, but now let's own our future and let's build it together. And that's why it's inspiring. Despite the challenges we feel, I think it's an inspiring moment to be there together and do that.
I want to comment, absolutely, this is the great audience to deliver that message, because you're talking about potential, and the individuals in this room are the ones that take that potential, make product and prosperity. So again, for us, we always want to be that partner with government to be able to, all the potential you're talking about, these are the individuals that will be driving that and really seizing the opportunity. I've been told I've got like an extra couple minutes. I'm going to push, so I'm going to ask one final question. And the defense industry, you've touched on it. You've talked about a national approach to it. And that's really what my question is. With about 3 minutes left, you've already highlighted the incredible spending that the government is investing in our defense. And as someone who's got family in the military, I just want to say thank you. How do you ensure this generational investment is truly national, with all benefiting, rather than truly hitting one region against another?
Well, it goes back to basically the call to action that I left with everyone in the room. I think even if you're small and medium-sized businesses, I go back to even give you the example of when I made my shoes, a part of them. It's a family business since 1933. They've been very well known for cowboy boots, but I think 50 years ago they started to do military boots for Army cadet, and now they do the shoes for the RCMP. My shoes are the same one the officer of the RCMP are wearing. You know, if a family business of 75 people, which has been in existence since 1933, decided a few years ago that they should have like a defense, I don't know if it's a defense strategy, but expanding their market, it taught me one lesson, that if a small business in rural Canada of 75 people, who's been doing the same thing since 1933, can pivot and say, well, there might be a slice for us in that, I think it's true for everyone in this room. In pretty much every industry, the defense investments are going to transform. You could be in construction and think, okay, if you're going to do these forward operating bases, there'll be something for me in that. You could even be in the health sector and saying, well, it'd be great if there was a clinic next to the base so that we can serve the community. You could be in the service business and say, well, with the productivity super deduction, how I can, build a plant or invest so that I can serve a need in the military. You can be in the new economy, in AI or quantum, and say, okay, what are the type of things that I could do to support the investment? You could be in research and science and say, well, could we look at dual use technology that we can invent? So for me, there is possibilities and opportunities across the nation. Obviously here in Manitoba, we're lucky because we have a huge industrial base. And we already are a leader in aerospace. critical minerals, energy. We have a lot of even in the ag sector. Think about, you know, what we're going to do in terms, because I go back to my thing, and I'll leave that with you, but think about the nexus between energy security, economic security. I would add food security and national security. When you look at these lenses in the world we live in, I think everyone in this room can see themselves in that. And that's why, for me, the pillars in the budget was really a blueprint for bringing this nation to its full potential. And I'm glad we could do that together. So I would say to everyone in this room, first of all, thank you for your time this morning. Let's seize the moment, let's be ambitious, and let's build a Canada we can all be proud. And I'm very confident we can do that together. Merci tout le monde.
A round of applause for Minister Champagne. Thank you very much, Minister. It's a true pleasure.